Have you ever stopped to think about how a civilization as powerful as the Roman Empire, which ruled over much of the known world, was able to collapse? The fall of Rome was not a sudden or isolated event, but the result of centuries of crises that eroded its foundations. While many believe that barbarian invasions caused its end, this is merely the tip of the iceberg. There are little explored secrets involving political crises, a declining economy, and decisive battles that sealed the fate of history's greatest empire. Throughout this video, we will dive deep into these events. We will explore the fatal mistakes made by the Romans, which paved the way for the rise of new barbarian kingdoms, and how these failures shaped the history of the Western world. Each crisis, each battle, each political decision played a crucial role in the disintegration of Rome. And don't think that these events are distant from our present. The legacy of Rome is still very much alive in our laws, social structures, and even the military strategies we adopt today. Stay with us until the end to discover how the rise and fall of Rome shaped the world we live in, and continues to influence it in surprising ways. The Roman Empire began to show signs of disintegration long before its final fall. The 3rd century was marked by a crisis so deep that it nearly destroyed the empire entirely. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome faced a period of internal instability, known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, which brought to light the political, military, and economic problems of the empire. Ambitious generals vied for power, while vulnerable borders were constantly attacked by barbarian invaders. To make matters worse, the economy of the empire was already showing signs of strain, unable to sustain the needs of an expanding empire whose borders stretched thousands of kilometers. This period was particularly marked by an alarming turnover of emperors. In just 50 years, Rome saw over 20 emperors rise and fall, many of them violently, as a result of assassinations or coups. The chaotic imperial succession reflected the political instability, with military leaders trying to consolidate their power amid civil wars and insurrections. Generals like Philip the Arab and Decius briefly ascended to the throne, but failed to restore order. The struggle for power weakened the empire, making it vulnerable to external attacks, especially from the Goths and Sassanids. On the battlefield, Roman defeats revealed a shocking reality. The military machine that once dominated the world was in decline. In the humiliating Battle of Edessa in 260 AD, Emperor Valerian was captured by the Persians, a devastating blow to Roman morale. The borders were no longer secure, and control over the vast Roman territories became increasingly difficult to maintain. The political, military, and economic crisis, combined with currency devaluation and a decline in agricultural production, plunged the empire into a cycle of decay that seemed impossible to reverse. However, amid the chaos, one figure emerged to try to save the empire: Diocletian. His profound reforms would give the empire a temporary breath of fresh air, as we will see next. In the midst of the crisis, General Diocletian rose to power in 284 AD, initiating an era of radical reforms that deeply marked the history of the Roman Empire. Diocletian realized that governing such a vast and fragmented territory was impossible for a single ruler. The solution? Divide power and responsibility. Thus, he introduced the Tetrarchy, a governance system that divided the empire into 4 parts, each governed by 2 Augusti and 2 Caesars. This aimed to bring greater administrative and military efficiency to the different regions of the empire. Diocletian's reforms brought a new order, reorganizing the empire so that it could respond more swiftly to external and internal threats. However, the creation of the Tetrarchy planted the seeds for future divisions. Although it provided brief stability, this system fostered rivalries among leaders and weakened imperial unity. Even so, Diocletian's administrative reforms gave the Roman army the capability to repel invaders and restore confidence in the legions, at least temporarily. Moreover, Diocletian restructured the military, creating smaller, more mobile units prepared to respond quickly to barbarian attacks on the borders. His military campaign against the Sassanid Persians was a notable success, securing the eastern borders for some time. However, economically, the empire still faced difficulties. Diocletian attempted to combat inflation through strict price controls, but this measure failed to restore the economic health of the empire. The increase in taxes and the corruption that permeated all levels of government continued to undermine the empire's foundation. Diocletian's reforms were a temporary relief, but by creating multiple centers of power, he also sowed the seeds for final division. Following his abdication, the tetrarchy would not last long, and internal disputes would resurge with full force, as we will see in the impact of barbarian invasions. Barbarian invasions are often cited as the main cause of the fall of the Roman Empire, but the truth is that they were more a consequence of internal weakening than the initial cause. Peoples such as the Goths, Vandals, and Huns began to pressure the Roman borders with increasing intensity, taking advantage of internal crises to advance into territories once considered impenetrable. One of the most significant events in this context was the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where the Goths overwhelmingly defeated the Roman army, killing Emperor Valens. This battle was a turning point, as it revealed to the world that the once invincible Roman army was now vulnerable. The Goths, led by Fritigern, continued their advance, sacking cities and causing the collapse of Roman infrastructure. More than that, Roman attempts to establish peace treaties with barbarian peoples repeatedly failed, resulting in an unstable and sometimes chaotic relationship. The barbarians were not just invaders. Many had already integrated into the Roman army as mercenaries, complicating this relationship even further. The barbarian pressure intensified over time. The Vandals, for example, invaded North Africa, one of the richest and most important regions for supplying Rome. Meanwhile, the Huns, led by Attila, posed a devastating threat, pressuring both the Eastern and Western empires. Attila even invaded Italy, but his march was halted partly due to a lack of supplies and Roman resistance in subsequent campaigns. Despite this, the inability of Rome to mount effective defenses indicated that the end was approaching. The barbarian invasions not only accelerated the collapse of Rome, but also exposed the internal weaknesses and fragmentation of the empire. This chaotic scenario would be further evidenced by the formal division of the empire, which we will see next. In 395 AD, the official division of the Roman Empire marked a point of no return in the long history of Rome's rise and fall. After the death of Theodosius III, the last emperor to rule the unified empire, Rome was divided into two halves: the Western Roman Empire, with its capital in Rome, and the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital in Constantinople. This division formalized what had already been a reality. Rome could no longer be governed as a single bloc, and the differences between East and West were profound, both politically and economically. While the Eastern Empire thrived under more efficient administration and a relatively stable economy, the Western Empire sank into political crises, barbarian invasions, and corruption. The capital of the West, Rome, no longer possessed the same splendor as before, and the isolated Western provinces suffered from a lack of resources and leadership. The division of the empire accentuated these differences, creating two distinct worlds: the East more prosperous and well-defended, and the West increasingly vulnerable and isolated. The Eastern Empire managed to keep its borders secure and even expand its territory in some areas. Under the leadership of generals like Belisarius, the East resisted Persian threats and managed to preserve territorial unity for a longer time. However, the Western Empire, lacking strong leadership and with poorly defended borders, saw its provinces gradually taken by barbarian invaders. Rome's isolation and the lack of effective communication with the East only worsened the situation. This division accelerated the fall of the West. While the East would survive as the Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years, the West was disintegrating rapidly, unable to withstand internal and external pressures. With the corruption and political instability we will see next, the fate of the Western Roman Empire was sealed. Corruption and political instability were two of the main factors that eroded the Roman Empire from within. Starting in the 3rd century, the succession of emperors became a spectacle of intrigue, assassinations, and coups. Many emperors ruled for short periods, frequently deposed or killed by their own generals. Control of the army became a political bargaining chip, with generals and senators using their influence to gain power and wealth, often to the detriment of the empire's cohesion. Internal disputes made the central government increasingly weak and fragmented. Political and military factions fought for control, and rarely could an emperor maintain power without the support of the legions, which frequently resulted in military revolts. This scenario of instability undermined the confidence of the populace and facilitated barbarian invasions, as the empire was more focused on resolving its internal crises than on defending its borders. Corruption also eroded the army, which was once the pillar of Roman power. Soldiers and officers accepted bribes to avoid battles, or even to betray their own emperors. This lack of discipline was one of the crucial factors that allowed barbarian invaders to penetrate so deeply into Roman territory. The loss of military cohesion weakened the defenses of the empire and allowed external enemies to exploit this vulnerability. In the realm of civil administration, corruption was equally devastating. Provincial governors abused their positions, exploiting local populations with exorbitant taxes and misappropriation of resources. The result was widespread revolt in the provinces, where support for the central government drastically decreased. Political fragmentation and the loss of control over the provinces made any attempt at recovery impossible. Corruption and internal instability paved the way for economic collapse, which we will delve into next. The Roman economy, which had been deteriorating since the 3rd century, collapsed during the crisis period. The devaluation of Roman currency was one of the most evident reflections of this decline. With increasing military expenses and a drop in tax revenues, emperors began to mint coins with less and less precious metal, resulting in uncontrolled inflation. Trust in the monetary system was shaken, and the Roman economy began to implode. High taxes further exacerbated the situation. Provincial governors imposed ever-increasing rates on the population, especially on small farmers and rural landowners. Agriculture, which was the backbone of the Roman economy, began to collapse, with many farmers abandoning their lands because they could no longer afford production costs. The result was a significant drop in food and goods production, which further aggravated the crisis. Moreover, the military conquests, which had once been sources of wealth for Rome, became an economic burden. Maintaining the army on the frontiers and sustaining military infrastructures became virtually impossible for an empire that could no longer generate sufficient wealth. The rising cost of maintaining the legions drained the coffers of the empire, which were increasingly empty. The economic collapse severely impacted trade, another fundamental piece of the Roman economy. Trade routes that connected the provinces of the empire began to disintegrate as security diminished and barbarian attacks increased. With a lack of reliable currency and the disintegration of trade routes, the empire became incapable of recovering economically. The economic collapse was a decisive blow, making Rome increasingly vulnerable, as we will see in the sack of 410 AD. The sack of Rome in 410 AD by the Visigoths, led by Alaric, was one of the most symbolic events of the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Although Rome was no longer the imperial capital, the sack was a devastating moral blow. The Visigoths, who initially sought a peace agreement, invaded the city after failed negotiations, exposing the vulnerability of what was once a powerful empire. Alaric took advantage of Roman weakness, attacking with skilled military tactics and exploiting the lack of cohesion in the city's defenses. The Roman army, weakened and disorganized, was unable to mount an effective defense. The sack lasted 3 days, during which palaces, temples, and homes were looted, and Rome, which had been the ultimate symbol of power and stability for centuries, was reduced to ruins. Although the sack was limited in terms of physical destruction, its psychological impact was immense. The Roman world had been shaken, and Rome's ancient glory seemed to be buried beneath the rubble. The invasion of Rome by the Visigoths was not just an isolated event, but a clear sign that the Western Empire was on the brink of collapse. Despite this, the Visigoths did not intend to completely destroy the city. After the plundering, Alaric and his army left, taking with them large amounts of wealth and prisoners. However, the event marked the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. which was becoming increasingly unable to resist external invasions. As we will see next, the last significant Roman resistance would be against another great invader, Attila and the Huns. The Battle of the Catalonian Fields, fought in 451 AD, was one of the last significant demonstrations of resistance by the Western Roman Empire. In this battle, Roman forces led by General Aetius joined forces with Germanic tribes to face the army of the Huns, led by Attila, the Scourge of God. Although the empire was already weakened, this battle showed that Rome still had the capacity to defend itself against formidable enemies. Aetius, known as the last of the Romans, managed to forge an unlikely alliance with the Visigoths and other barbarian tribes that were also threatened by the Huns. The battle was brutal and bloody, but in the end Attila was forced to retreat, marking one of the rare defeats of his military career. Although Attila caused destruction wherever he went, this victory represented a small yet significant demonstration that Rome still had the strength to resist. However, the victory at the Catalonian Fields was not enough to reverse the empire's declining course. Although Attila had been contained, the Western Roman Empire was practically exhausted, lacking the resources and political cohesion to stay united. The constant barbarian invasions combined with internal corruption made any recovery unfeasible. This battle was a last gasp of Rome as a military power. While the Eastern Empire would continue to exist for centuries, the West was about to fall, definitively, as we will see with the deposition of the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus in 476 A. The deposition of Romulus Augustulus, the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire, in 476 AD, officially marked the end of an era. Romulus, a young emperor at only 16 years old, was deposed by Odoacer, a barbarian leader who decided that there was no longer a need to maintain the facade of a crumbling empire. This event is widely considered the milestone marking the end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages. By deposing Romulus, Odoacer sent the imperial insignia to the Eastern Emperor, symbolizing the end of Roman power in the West. Instead of ruling as emperor, Odoacer declared himself king of Italy, taking control of the former Roman provinces. This act was more than a symbolic blow. It represented the transfer of power from Roman hands to the barbarian peoples who had already invaded and settled much of the territory. Romulus Augustulus, although a weak and young emperor, became a symbol of the fall of a civilization that had dominated the world for centuries. His deposition was the final reflection of an empire that had already lost its political, military, and economic strength. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the legacy of Rome began to be perpetuated by new barbarian kingdoms that were emerging, as we will see in the final topic about the legacy of Rome and the emergence of these new kingdoms. With the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe entered a new era of political fragmentation. Barbarian kingdoms such as the Franks, Visigoths, and Lombards emerged in the former Roman territories, bringing with them a mix of tribal traditions and Roman influences. Although Rome had fallen politically, its cultural, legal, and military legacy remained deeply rooted in Western civilization. The Catholic Church, which had strengthened in the last centuries of the empire, became the main heir to Roman traditions, perpetuating the influence of Rome on the religious and cultural institutions of Europe. Christianity, which spread throughout the empire, became a unifying force in a politically fragmented Europe, serving as a bridge between the ancient Roman world and the new barbarian world. Among the new kingdoms, the Franks, led by Clovis, consolidated one of the first great medieval empires. Clovis, upon converting to Christianity, secured the support of the Catholic Church, initiating a lasting alliance between temporal and spiritual power. This relationship would be fundamental for the formation of the Carolingian Empire, which would later attempt to revive part of the ancient glory of Rome. The legacy of Rome was also evident in the legal and administrative structures of the new kingdoms. Many of the barbarian kings adopted Roman law as the basis for their legislation, recognizing the effectiveness of the ancient Roman institutions. The Roman cities, roads, and aqueducts continued to be used, although many of these infrastructures eventually fell into disrepair. Although the Western Roman Empire had fallen, its legacy lived on through the institutions and practices that shaped the course of European history. The rise and fall of Rome left an indelible mark on Western civilization, and its impact continues to be felt to this day. Now that you know the secrets behind the fall of the Roman Empire, it is clear that this process was long and complex. Internal crises, barbarian invasions, and profound economic decline contributed to the collapse of the largest empire in history. But even after its fall, the legacy of Rome still lives on in our laws, architecture, and even in many modern military strategies. And you, do you think the lessons from the rise and fall of ancient empires can still teach us something today? Leave your comment below. I would love to hear your opinion. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue learning more about the empires that shaped history. And of course, feel free to watch our latest video, which is now showing on the screen, to continue this fascinating journey.